Hello students and welcome to our classroom piano lessons on the web. Your teacher Tim here. We're going to come together, power up our piano skills, and share them with the world. And one thing you're going to need to power up your piano skills is ear training. Today I'm going to introduce you into ear training and the 3 things you need to be practicing in order to get good at ear training, which is training your ears. How about that? And this will allow you to play songs by ear. Will be able to allow you to pick out mistakes a lot easier, and also allow you to learn songs easier, since it'll give your brain more information to grab a hold of. The first thing I want you to practice are scales. Scales are very important. I assume you probably know something about scales already, but I'll give you a real quick rundown in case you don't. So let's take a look here. All a scale is from one note starting in a key to the same note up an octave, and all the notes in that key in between. So the C major scale will start on C, end on C, and have all the notes from C to C. I just turned on my keyboard here, so that's why you couldn't hear the sound until now. Okay, the 3 types of scales you should start becoming accustomed to hearing are: 1, the major scale. You can recognize a major scale based on really 2 things. One is, does it sound happy, bright and happy, or sad? So you may be saying, that sounds sad. Well, are you sure? Let me play the opposite. Or I should play. Now, that one definitely sounded sadder. So this one is indeed the major scale. The major scale also has a leading tone, the next to last note, and it leads you back to the starting note, also known as the tonic. So it sounds happy, and you got that, if I stopped on that note, it really bothers me anyway. It should bother you in terms of the sound, because it really wants you to pull it back to that C. All major scales sound generally the same. Now, if you have something like perfect pitch, you're going to be able to hear the difference between a D major scale and a C major scale and an A flat major scale. However, they should all sound like major scales to you no matter what. So, here's D major scale. Hear that leading tone next to last note? Well, that's one characteristic of a major scale. There's another kind of scale with that, though. But knowing that it also sounds bright and happy, that kind of leads you to the right direction. So I'm going to play a scale, and all I want you to do is listen and tell me whether you think it's major or not major. So here we go. One more time. Next to last note there. Back up to the octave. That is indeed a major scale. Let's try this one. Well, by playing the first 3 notes, it kind of gives it away that it is indeed not a major scale. That is a type of minor scale, which gets me into the next kind of scale that I want you to learn, which is the natural minor scale. So let's take a look and show you what I mean. So a natural minor scale would be like if you played from A up to the next A and all the white keys in between. That's the key of A minor. And just by playing those notes, that's your natural minor. It starts out, this was major, by the way. This is how major sounds. Sounds kind of bright and happy, this. So you can really tell each scale by the first 3 notes. And this one, the next to last note, is not a leading tone. A leading tone has to be a half step or a semitone away. This is a whole tone away. So for it to be a leading tone, it has to be G sharp instead of A. That really pulls you back. So you know that this one is natural minor because it has that starting sound of being dark and sad, and it doesn't have a leading tone. So let me play, kind of combine the two together now, or into one practice session. So I'm going to play a scale, and you're going to have to determine whether it's major or natural minor. Here we go. Oops, sorry. So what do you think? It is indeed a natural minor scale. You have the sad sound plus the absence of the leading tone. How about this one? So what do you think? Well, if I haven't given it away already, that is indeed the major scale right there. Okay, let's add in the last type of scale that I think you should be familiar with. Of course, there's a lot of other ones like modes and things like that. But the last one I think you should become familiar with is the harmonic minor scale, which things get a little hairy from here on out. I mean, it's not too bad. But a natural minor scale, or a harmonic minor scale, begins the exact same way that a natural minor does, except that you add back in the leading tone. So it's almost like combining a natural minor with a major, where you start with a natural minor, and then you have that leading tone up there that really gives you that pull back to the starting note. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a scale, and you're going to have to determine whether it's major, minor, or major, natural minor, or harmonic minor. Here we go. All right. Oh, wait, sorry. So what do you think? Well, it's definitely minor, right? Starts out minor. Then how does it end? Well, you have that leading tone in the next to last note that pulls you back up to the tonic note there. If it was natural minor, you would have that next to last note not a half step away instead of a whole step away, which doesn't really give you that pull back to the tonic. Let's try another one, shall we? How about this one? Well, I would say that that is definitely a harmonic minor scale, because you start out, you know, kind of dark and sad, and then you have that leading tone leading you back to the tonic. All right, I think you get the idea. Let's do one more. Oh, wait. You know what? We're going to do this one. I always like to play the first three notes again. That is a major scale. So practice these on your own. Major, natural minor, and harmonic minor. If you're looking to really get a lot of practice in on these, as well as the other things we're going to talk about tonight, I have an ear training course over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. I'm going to put a link in the description, but check out the rest of the lesson first before you go over there, because we're going to cover the other two things. The next one I want to cover is chords. So you should also begin to become familiar with your chords as well. If you don't know, chords are these things where you're playing two or more notes at the same time. A common type of chord that we have is known as the triad. Let's take a look. A triad, how many notes in a triad do you think? Well, if you've been following me a long time, you know the answer already. But like a triceratops has 3 horns, like a triangle has 3 sides, 3 points, a triad is going to have 3 notes to it, what we call a root, a third, and a fifth. I want you to become familiar with all types of triads. These are as following. Major. Sounds bright and happy, just like the major scale did. Minor. Sounds sad, like the minor scale did. Diminished. It's dark and sad, but it also has more of a sinister, and it just has a bite to it. You hear that? Compared to the minor. Now, when you first do this, you're going to confuse minor and diminished a lot because they both begin with the first same two notes. Really, the difference is this top note. With diminished, it becomes closer together. Actually, that's where the term diminished comes from, because you're literally diminishing the size between the notes. So let's take it here. So look here. So here's major. Here's minor. So from major to minor, you move one note also. You just move the middle note down a half step. And then to get to diminished, you bring that top one down. So you are literally bringing all the notes closer together. So what I'm going to do before we add the last one here, I am going to play one of these chords. You're going to have to tell me what you think it is. Now, what I would recommend you do is, when you hear the chord, ask yourself three questions so far. Does it sound happy? If it sounds happy, it's major. Does it sound sad? If it sounds sad, it's minor. It could also be diminished, but then the third question you want to ask yourself is, does it sound either scary, or does it sound tense at all? Because if it sounds tense to you, it's probably diminished. So what about this one? Well, I would say it definitely doesn't sound tense. And it actually sounds happy. So if you said major, that is indeed the correct answer. Let's try another one. Well, that one definitely sounds sadder, right? So the two options we have is whether it is minor or diminished. Let's think about it, right? It sounds sad, but does it have a bite to it? Like that would. It kind of gave it away. But no, it doesn't have a bite to it. So this one is indeed a minor triad. Let's try a few more. How about this one? Oh, you hear that bite right away? You could just hear that. That made my hair stand on end. And if it made your hair stand on end as well, then it is indeed a diminished chord, because that's a dark sound and that bite to it. All right, we're going to talk about one more type of triad that I recommend you become familiar with. And then we're going to kind of go over seventh chords a little bit, just so you know that you should be practicing those as well. All right, here we go. So you have major, you have minor, you have diminished. And now there's another one. It's called augmented. So augmented means that you are actually augmenting the space between the notes. So you're actually basically starting like you do with a major chord, except we're raising the top note up to create an overall larger distance, or an augmented distance. Now this one might get a little confusing for you, because hear how that one has a bite to it too? Kind of like the diminished did, right? So these two, if you're anything like me and anything like a lot of my other students, it is going to confuse you at first, because you're going to go through those questions in your head. Does it sound happy? Does it sound sad? But does it have a bite to it? Does it sound tense? And if the answer is yes to that, you're really going to have to finely tune your ears to hear the difference. So let us listen here. So let me play a chord, and we'll figure out what it is. So it had a bite to it, right? So it can either be diminished or augmented. And normally you're not going to be able to see the piano keyboard here when you're listening to these. So if you're cheating that way, enjoy it while it lasts. But we have this one. It has a bite to it. Would you say that it has an overall dark sound or a brighter sound? See how that one has a bite to it too? But the first two notes are the beginning of a major chord instead. So I kind of gave you the answer that this one is diminished. And you can even hear, if you're good at, this is something, by the way, I want to mention that if you're struggling right now, you have no idea what I'm talking about, you're really having well, hopefully you know what I'm talking about, but if you're struggling hearing the differences between these, don't worry. It takes time. That's one thing I want to tell you right off the bat. So you can even hear that these are closer together than these. This one, I also like to kind of put augmented in this frame of mind. Augmented has this note up top, right? That almost sounds like a leading tone, right? it almost makes you, it almost has a sound of yearning to it, or like you have to go somewhere, right? Like if I did that, that would be kind of satisfying. So that's one way I dissect an augmented chord to determine that between a diminished chord. Diminished chord has that bite to it, but that top note doesn't really want to lead me anywhere. However, that augmented chord really kind of has more of a pull to it, at least in my brain. Okay, here we go. I'm going to play one of these 4 chords. We're going to kind of see if we can figure these out. So here we go. Okay. Started out with an easy one here. Hopefully you said major, because it sounds both stable, it doesn't have a bite to it, it doesn't sound tense, it also sounds happy. How about this one? Well, this one, right, definitely has a darker sound to it. So major's out. Use your process of elimination. Major's out. So it could be minor, it could be diminished, it could even be augmented, but we have to ask ourselves another question down the list. Does it have a bite to it? Well, not really, because if it had a bite to it, it might sound something like that. This sounds a little bit more stable, I would say. So this is probably a minor chord, and indeed it is. All right, here we go. Let's try another one. Oh, you hear that? It definitely had a bite to it right away. So that rolls out major, that rolls out minor, so process of elimination on these. And it can either be diminished or augmented. Well, let's try to listen here. So are the first 2 notes, do they sound happy or sad? Well, I would say that they sound sadder. And that top note, while it does kind of stick out at you, doesn't really have the same pull than if it had something like this. Like you really hear that top note really wants to take you somewhere. So because it sounded tense, and the beginning of it sounded minor, and the top note, while tense, doesn't pull you anywhere, I would say, and correctly, if you said so, this is a diminished triad. Okay, so I want you on your own to practice these. Again, my ear training course is a great way to do this. We talk about this stuff in a lot more detail, and also I provide you with examples and things to practice so you can get better and better. But we're going to move on to, actually really quickly, I want to talk about 7th chords. So 7th chords is something you should be aware of. Master your triads first. Honestly, if you're just still getting the hang of these triads, do not move on the 7th chords. But you should be familiar with a major 7th chord, which sounds dreamy. A dominant chord, a dominant 7th chord, which sounds bluesy. So whenever you hear me play the B-flat blues, those all use dominant 7th chord. So if it sounds like blues, dominant 7th. If it sounds dreamy, major 7th. If it starts with a minor sound, but also has that 7th on it, like the blues scale does, or the dominant 7th chord does, then it's a minor 7th chord. And then you probably should also be familiar with half diminished. You can hear that diminished chord on the bottom. And fully diminished chord, which has the most bite to it, the strongest bite. So you should become familiar with those as well. I'm not going to go into those in detail right now. I just want you to get started on those triads. Okay, let's get on to the next important part of our lesson, which is intervals, probably the most important thing. What is an interval? Well, an interval is the distance between 2 of really anything, right? But in this case, we're talking about between 2 pitches. So a pitch on the piano is a note here. A pitch higher is, a note up there. So a pitch is actually the like where it is on the piano in terms of up or down. Those are pitches. An interval in rhythm's a little bit different because you can have fast intervals between the notes and slower. That's a time interval though. These are pitch intervals. I want to mention that. Okay, so here we go. So intervals are really useful because they have happened in music all the time. And as you get to recognize these, you will get better and better. at picking them out in your music. Like I said, the big point of ear training, other than being able to play by ear and developing that skill, is being able to pick out mistakes in your own playing. So if you know what these sound like already, you're going to be able to pick out mistakes a lot easier. The key to intervals, hearing the difference between, say, this and this, is assigning a song that you're familiar with that starts with one of these intervals. So when I teach what we call a major second, by the way, let me explain intervals a little bit more detail for a second. So an interval is always designated by a number. So if you had a note and you and your friend played another note on another piano the exact same place, it would be called a unison. Or, you've probably heard the term singing in unison before. That means everybody's singing the same notes and the same pitches. Now, a note that's one away is actually called a second, because you count the note on the bottom, note on the top. So 1, 2. The note, so you can pick out a second pretty much anywhere, because the notes will be close together. They're either going to be a half step away or a whole step away. Either way, that is a second. Now, there's different types of seconds, but just to show you what a second is. Now, if you bring it up one note further, that's a third. You count the outer notes, 1, the note in between, 2, 3. So that's a third. Thirds are evenly stacked. So the beginning of a triad is actually composed of thirds. Now, if you bring that up one more note, that's a fourth. One more note is a fifth. So that's how the numbering system, 6th, 7th, and 8th, aka octave. Now, when I'm teaching major seconds, which is a whole step away, or whole tone, some people might get on me in the comments, I teach the piece Happy Birthday. Because at the beginning of that piece, Happy Birthday, that birthday is actually a major second apart. So if I play like this, well, that's a major second as well. A major second will also sound like the beginning of a major scale. Like that. A minor second is the piece Jaws from the movie Jaws. Like that. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play either a major second or a minor second. I'm actually going to put, because this one's really easy to identify on the keyboard, I'm going to play it. And what do you think? Do you think it's Jaws or do you think it's Happy Birthday? Kind of gave it away a little bit. But that's Happy Birthday. By the way, that minor second has a bite to it, kind of like the diminished chord did. But that second is a bit more stable. You can hear that it just has more of a pleasant sound. Now, it's pretty easy to hear the difference between those two. Like if I play this one. What do you think about this one? Well, that doesn't sound like Happy Birthday, does it? But it does sound like the beginning of Jaws. So there you go. So you want to do this for all of your intervals. You want to assign a piece for like thirds, fourths, which happens to be the wedding theme. A major third. Oh, Kumbaya, major third. So if you hear Kumbaya, my lord, that is a major third. If you hear the wedding bells, that is what we call a perfect fourth. So let's just quickly go through these. I'm going to play one of the ones I've talked about so far. Think about, what does it sound like? Happy Birthday? Does it sound like Jaws? Does it sound like Kumbaya? Or does it sound like the Wedding March? So here we go. You ready? What do you think? That is Jaws. So that is a minor second. Okay, let us try another one. So kumbaya, oops, kumbaya, my lord. So that is indeed kumbaya, which was a major third. So I think you get the idea on how to get these in here. Let's try this one. What do you think? Well, that sounds a little bit like a third, right? Kumbaya. Not quite. It doesn't really fit. So you might actually have to kind of sing the song to yourself to see happy birthday. No. But, no, it's not Jaws either. So it has to be, whoops, has to be the Wedding March, which is a perfect fourth. So I think you get the idea. Assign a piece for all of these. Fifth is, right, is Star Wars, as you know. So assign a piece for all of these, and that's how you learn your intervals. Practice your intervals. Practice them, practice them, practice them, practice them. I implore you, because intervals, out of all these things, first of all, intervals, everything is made of intervals in music. Everything we talked about today. So major scales, made of intervals. Having to be a lot of seconds in there. The chords, intervals. They also have intervals on the outside. A fifth there. How about, well, and then intervals themselves have intervals. I was trying to think of the third thing we talked about, but that was intervals indeed. Okay, so remember, the three things you want to practice to get better at ear training are what? What, guys? What? Think about it. Write it in the comments. Think about it. Think about it. What is it? What is it? It is scales. What three types of scales should you be able to recognize? This is quiz time. Making sure you are paying attention the whole time and not sleeping and drooling at your desk. The three types of triads you should be familiar with are, or first of all, you should be familiar with major, minor, diminished, and augmented triads. And then what? You should become familiar with the types of seventh chords. Start with your triads first. Make sure you master those even before you do the seventh chords. What was the next thing? Oh, the scales, I meant to say. Sorry, I got confused in my head for a second. I know that didn't sound right. The three types of scales you should be familiar with are major. I'm the one sleeping at my desk. Major, natural minor, and harmonic minor are the three. And then, obviously, I gave you the answers to the next part, which was all of your triads. Become familiar with those as well. If you want to learn more about ear training, make sure you check out this playlist right here. Also, I have an ear training course as well as a lot of other courses over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. So if you want to get an iron grip on your intervals, your scales, and your chords, hearing them, check out that course. All right, everybody, this has been Tim from Piano Lessons on the Web. Thank you so much for being a part of our classroom, and I'll see you in the next lesson.